was a quiet evening on the Johnson farm, the sun dipping low, casting long shadows across the hay fields. Birds chirped their last songs of the day, and a sweet breeze danced through the barn doors, carrying the scent of fresh hay and earth. Inside, old tools hung rusted on the walls, a testament to years of hard work. At that moment, it felt peaceful, but that peacefulness was about to be shattered. As the clock struck 9, two figures crouched low in a nearby thicket. They were dressed in dark clothing, their faces obscured by hoods, their hearts racing with a mix of adrenaline and arrogance. To them, this farm seemed like easy pickings, a sprawling land with little security. What they didn't know was that this farm held more than just crops and animals. It held secrets and a fierce determination to protect. They waited, breathing shallowly, scanning the landscape. Their eyes glimmered with ill intent, seeing the lights in the farmhouse flicker off one by one. The very stillness of the night felt inviting, almost like a promise that they would soon be rich. They'd done their homework. No security cameras, little chance of attracting attention. They were in a small town, one where the residents trusted each other, where doors rarely locked. The slightest rustle in the barn drew their attention. The older Johnson's son, Jake, was still out. He had taken it upon himself to check the animals one last time before turning in for the night. It was a ritual they had all grown accustomed to. Their family had worked this land for generations, always caring for what they had. Jake's footsteps echoed in the silence as he walked through the stalls, reassured by the quiet whines of the cows and the soft clucks of the chickens in their coop. As he reached the far corner of the barn, something tugged at his instinct like a chill on the back of his neck. He paused, frozen, the shadows feeling thicker than usual. It was then that he spotted movement outside the barn doors, two figures cloaked in darkness. His heart raced, both in fear and anger. They weren't here to steal his family's produce. They were here to invade his home. He quickly ducked behind a row of hay bales, trying to stay out of sight. The two intruders crept closer, exchanging hushed words, the tension palpable. Jake could see the glint of something metallic in one of their hands, a crowbar. The sight tightened his gut. A wave of resolve washed over him. They wouldn't take anything from him, not while he was there to protect it. Knowing he couldn't just hide, he pulled out his phone and texted his father, "We have intruders in the barn." He felt a rush of empowerment, a sense of igniting something deep within him. The farmhouse was in sight, the comforting glow of his family's lights beckoning him to safety. But he stood still, adrenaline coursing through his veins. Outside, the intruders had slipped inside the barn, their movements silent but frantic. They peered around, eyes wide and searching, intoxicated by the prospect of an easy score. With each step, they stepped deeper into a world they didn't belong to. But they were not alone. Just as one of them reached for a tool hanging on the wall, they heard the unmistakable sound of a door creaking open. They froze, exchanging panicked glances as they crouched behind a workbench. Moments later, a flickering flashlight beam scoured the barn, illuminating tools and shadows alike, moving closer. In the shadows, Jake remained still, smothering a surge of fright with fierce determination. He could hear his heart pounding in his ears, drowning out the rustle of hay and the short breaths of the intruders. Then came the voice, firm and commanding. Jake's father, Tom, had stepped into the barn, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "Hey," Tom called out, a presence of authority echoing in the stillness. The intruders recoiled, reality crashing in on them. This wasn't just an empty barn, it was a battleground for their lives if they didn't escape. They could feel the weight of the moment, their bravado slipping. But as fear clawed at their insides, it was too late. Tom's instincts had kicked in. He knew something was off. Jake watched as his father's determination filled the barn, as thick and tangible as the hay that surrounded them. Tom took another step forward, his voice unwavering. "I'm not afraid to call the cops." The intruders shifted, deciding between fight or flight. But before they could decide, Jake made his move. He burst from behind the hay bales, his heart racing but his mind clear. "Get out." His voice was gruff, projecting an unexpected authority. The intruders froze once more, their confidence unraveling before them. For a moment, it was as if time stood still, the barn itself holding its breath. Then it happened. The taller intruder who had been urging the other forward lunged toward Jake, crowbar raised high. But Jake was ready. He kicked out painfully, connecting with the man's shins. The intruder stumbled, losing his grip on the crowbar, sending it clattering to the floor. "Dad, grab it!" Jake yelled, and without missing a beat, Tom lunged for the weapon, his movements swift and powerful, the kind honed by years of labor. The other intruder's bravado evaporated, panic setting in as he realized the odds were shifting against them. They scrambled backward, one diving for the open barn doors, the other frantically searching for an escape. With a decisive swing, Tom brandished the crowbar, his voice cutting through the chaos. "I won't hesitate to use this." The threat hung heavy in the air, more than just words. It was an unwavering promise. The intruders paused, the fight leaving them. They weighed their choices, adrenaline racing but their hearts sinking. In that charged moment, the weight of life's choices hung thick. This wasn't just a battle for possessions. It was a fight for dignity, for a family rooted in tradition, for a life's work held sacred against the encroachment of turmoil. Realizing they were outmatched, the intruders bolted, darting out into the darkness, the crackling crunch of dry leaves under their hurried steps fading into the night. Jake and Tom watched, the flickering flashlight illuminating their faces, the thrill of victory washing over them. They had fought together, each instinctively doing what needed to be done. Just as the adrenaline began to fade, the reality of what had happened settled in. Tom asked, turning to Jake, his eyes wide with concern. "I'm fine, Dad, just..." Scared, Jake admitted, the gravity of the moment washing over him. "We did what we had to do," Tom replied, his voice steady. In that very moment, they both realized that they weren't just protecting their possessions. They were guarding the legacies of generations past, sweat and toil woven into every blade of grass, every shuttered window of the farmhouse. Soon after, the sound of sirens pierced the air, pulling them back to reality. The sheriffs arrived, lights flashing as they investigated the scene. The tension dissipated into an uneasy calm, knowing they'd face the aftermath together, united. Words of bravado faded into quiet hope. They had weathered the storm. Later, as they sat on the porch, surrounded by the fading scent of earth and hay, they exchanged silent glances, the shared weight of the night binding them closer together. The world outside their little haven felt more uncertain than ever, yet within the confines of their home, a stillness prevailed. They had chosen courage. They had chosen family. As the moon rose higher, illuminating the landscape, they spoke about the future. The intruders had underestimated not just their home, but the spirit that dwelled within it. A spirit rooted in community, connection, and an unyielding drive to protect what mattered. And for that night at least, the Johnsons returned to their quiet existence, the stars shining brighter above them, a reminder that love and loyalty will always prevail against the encroaching shadows. A sudden crash echoed through the still night air, shattering the tranquility of the Johnson farm. The sound of glass shattering reached the ears of Jake Johnson, who was wide awake in his room, staring at the ceiling. The familiar scent of fresh hay and the distant lowing of cows usually comforted him, but that night something felt off. He shot up, adrenaline pumping through his veins. Jake quickly grabbed his phone from the nightstand, its glow illuminating the darkness like a beacon of hope. His heart pounded in rhythm with the worried thoughts racing through his mind. Could it be a raccoon in the barn again? But deep down, he knew better. The sound had been too forceful, too deliberate. It felt like an intrusion. He crept quietly out of his room, the creaky floorboards beneath his feet echoing the tension in his gut. The farmhouse was bathed in moonlight, shadows dancing on the walls. His parents were fast asleep down the hall. A sudden responsibility washed over him. He had become the protector of his home. He tiptoed toward the front door, peeking through the small window. What he saw stole his breath away. Two figures were moving under the dim light of the barn, their silhouettes darting around like phantoms. Jake's heart raced, a mix of fear and anger pounding in his chest. The response was rapid, "Stay put." But Jake couldn't stand by and wait. He had grown up in this farm, had slaved in these fields, lived through countless sweat-drenched summers and bitter winters. He wouldn't let anyone steal that from him. Quietly but with purpose, he made his way through the house and out the back door, the cool night air brushing against his skin. He slipped into the shadows, his breath held tight. Every crunch of gravel under his feet felt like thunder in his ears. He approached the barn, the door slightly ajar, and listened intently. Voices floated on the breeze, low and hurried, a frantic conversation twisted with nervous laughter. They sounded cocky, almost too confident, as if they thought this farm was an easy target. Little did they know, nothing here came without a fight. Jake peered through the crack in the barn doors. He saw them. Two men, rough around the edges, faces obscured by hats pulled low. They were rummaging through the supplies, tossing tools around as if they were mere toys. His stomach tightened at the sight of the family's belongings being so carelessly tossed aside. Suddenly, a spotlight flickered out of nowhere, illuminating one of the men as he reached for a pitchfork. He shouted, a twisted grin on his face. Jake's resolve hardened. Feral instincts kicked in. He glanced around for anything he could use, his eyes landing on an old shovel propped against the barn wall. It wasn't much, but in this moment it felt like a sword. With his heart pounding like a war drum, he pushed the barn doors open just wide enough to make his move. The creak echoed in the stillness, and both men turned, surprise flashing on their faces. That moment felt stretched thin, the air thick with anticipation. Jake stepped forward, his voice steady despite the storm of fear raging inside him. Get out. The intruders blinked, momentarily taken aback. Just seconds ago, they had envisioned an effortless score, a mindless theft, but now they stood before a determined young man holding a shovel like a warrior ready for battle. One of them sneered, trying to regain control of the situation. Behind them, the barn doors creaked ominously, like an impending judgment waiting to be delivered. Jake felt a surge of defiance rising within him. This is my home, and you need to leave. Before they could respond, Jake lunged forward, brandishing the shovel like a cavalryman charging at the enemy. The intruders scrambled back, their bravado slipping in a matter of seconds. One of them knocked a barrel over in his haste, spilling tools across the dirt floor. Purpose collided with chaos. In that heartbeat, everything changed. Panic flashed in the eyes of the intruders as they realized they were not invulnerable, not on this land. Jake, fueled by determination, swung the shovel, creating distance between them. One of the men laughed nervously, his bravado crumbling. It's just a stupid kid with a shovel. With that, they turned and bolted toward the exit, but before they could make their escape, a familiar sound rippled through the air, the gravel crunching beneath heavy boots. Jake's father, Tom, emerged from the shadows, flashlight in hand, muscles tense and ready for action. Tom's voice boomed, layered with authority. The intruders skidded to a halt, caught between the light and the massive presence of Tom. They knew they were trapped. Panic turned to fear, and fear turned to desperate calculations. Tom wasted no time. He demanded, his voice steady and unyielding. Just. One of the men stammered, glancing back and forth between Tom and Jake. Jake's jaw tightened. They claimed innocence, but he remembered the chaos they'd sown just minutes ago. You're lying. Just as Tom prepared to call the police, a loud crash, which sounded ominously like the barn door swinging wide open, echoed in the distance. Then came the sound of barking. The Johnson family dog, Buster, had awoken, his protective instincts kicking in. He charged down the path toward the barn, ready to defend what was his. The intruders paled, their confidence evaporating like morning dew. The fear was palpable as they glanced at each other, weighing their options, but deep down, they knew how this ended. The barn was no longer a place of easy pickings. It had become a fortress of resolve. As Buster's frantic barking grew closer, the men turned to flee. One shouted, and like startled deer, they sprinted into the shadows, leaving behind the tools they had scattered. The night air grew tense once more, the remnants of chaos flashing before them like ghostly reminders. Tom stepped forward and called after them. You think you can come here and take what belongs to us? Jake stood beside him, shovel still in hand, chest heaving with the remnants of adrenaline. And in that moment, the truth rang clear. This was not merely about property. It was about pride, legacy, and the unyielding ties that layered their lives into a rich tapestry of love and labor. As quiet enveloped them again, Tom turned to Jake, his expression a mix of relief and concern. You did good, son. Jake nodded, his heart still racing but now fueled by something else, an unshakable bond with his father and a fierce love for their home that pulsed through the very ground beneath him. "We're stronger together," he replied. "I know," Tom said, placing a reassuring hand on Jake's shoulder. "We have to be vigilant." The two walked back to the farmhouse, the moonlight guiding their steps. The chaos of the night melted away into a familiar sense of normalcy. Buster bounded alongside, his tail wagging, ready to return to the warmth of home. Once inside, they locked the door and flipped on the lights, illuminating the cozy kitchen where laughter usually flowed. Despite the night's events, there was something comforting about being together, grounded in the essence of family. Jake asked, his voice softer now, the thrill of adrenaline traded for the weight of concern. "I don't know, but if they do, they'll see we stand together," Tom replied, his voice steady and reassuring. "This land is our home, our heritage." Later, as they settled into their routines again, Jake couldn't shake the feeling of anxiety. Each creak in the old house rang like an alarm in his ears, but he also felt a new resilience blossoming within him. This wasn't just about protecting crops or tools. It was about standing proud, facing all challenges together, no matter how daunting they seemed. Days turned into weeks, and life regained its rhythm on the farm. Seasons changed, but the memory of that night lingered, a reminder of courage found in unexpected places. One warm afternoon, while tending to the animals, Jake glanced out at the fields. The vibrant green hadn't lost its charm, the earth still rich beneath his fingertips. This was home, and it was worth fighting for. Then, in a moment of clarity, he realized the fight hadn't just been against intruders. It had been a fight against fear, against the unknown, that feeling of helplessness that could easily paralyze anyone. But they had stood tall, and the bond forged between father and son in that moment had forever altered the fabric of their lives. As weeks passed, the plot thickened. The story of the Johnsons began to spread among the townsfolk, turning into local lore. In a small town where everyone knew one another, the tale of a father and son defending their farm became a rallying call, a reminder that in unity there is strength. Their bravery inspired others. Neighbors began securing their properties more rigorously, forming tight-knit alliances. They started community watch groups, a band of citizens ready to defend their homes, sharing resources, stories, and laughter over barbecues and porch gatherings. Jake learned resilience from that night. As he grew older, the lessons ingrained in him remained a warrior's mindset rooted in the simplicity of a shovel. He began to see each day on the farm as another opportunity to cultivate not just crops, but the essence of community woven around him. Years later, standing on the porch collectively built by indulgent hands and laborious spirits, a feeling of pride washed over him as he watched children play in the sun-drenched grass. They all knew the story, their own legend sung through generations. And while the specter of that night always lingered in the back of his mind, he wasn't just a kid defending a farm anymore. He had become a pillar of strength in a community built on trust, love, and shared history. What once seemed fragile solidified into powerful roots, and Jake would always stand vigilant, ready to protect it. This was his home, and together they would face whatever came their way, vigilant, united forever, together. The night sky draped the Johnson farm in darkness, a blanket of stars twinkling like scattered diamonds above. It was a still evening, the wind whispering softly through the cornfields, when suddenly a loud crash splintered the silence, sending adrenaline coursing through Jake Johnson's veins. He jolted from his dreams, heart thundering in his chest. Instinctively, he knew something was wrong. Jake leapt out of bed, urgency fueling his movements. He pulled on a pair of jeans and slipped into his boots, the familiar texture grounding him in the moment. The long hallways of the farmhouse felt different tonight, shadows clinging in corners, the air thick with tension. As he crept to the window, he peered out into the inky blackness, his breath caught in his throat. Out in the barn, two figures moved quickly, their silhouettes erratic and hurried. They weren't animals, they were humans, and they were up to no good. Cold dread settled in his stomach. His mind raced back to whispered conversations among neighbors about trouble lurking in the outskirts of town. Was this what they had been warned about? Seconds felt like hours. Just as he pressed send, he heard a reply ping back, "Stay put." Jake's heart raced as he quickly made his way to the front door, his pulse matching the pounding rhythm of his thoughts. He had grown up on this farm. He'd spent summer days working under the sun, feeling the earth shift beneath his fingertips. This land was his, and he wasn't about to let anyone take it from him. The barn was just a short dash from the farmhouse. Jake stepped outside, the cool night air hitting his skin like a cold slap. He moved carefully, straining his ears for any sounds, each creak of the old wooden floorboards beneath him amplifying the deep silence. He could see it now, the barn's familiar outline against the sky. As he approached, he ducked low, careful to avoid detection. His heart thudded furiously. The two figures were inside, roaring with laughter now, a false sense of security washing over them as they rummaged through the supplies. Jake's hands clenched into fists at his sides. They thought this was easy pickings. They thought wrong. Memories flickered through his mind, working the fields alongside his father, the pride they shared in the harvest, the stories told over dinner. This farm was their legacy. He couldn't let anyone tarnish that. Glancing back at the house, he felt a surge of determination. He needed to protect everything that mattered. Desperately searching for anything to arm himself, he spotted an old garden hoe leaning against the barn wall. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. In the dim light, Jake gripped it tightly and took a deep breath. Inside the barn, the intruders had pulled down a few tools, their laughter echoing through the straw-strewn floor. They tossed around anything that seemed valuable, careless in their plundering. They didn't know who they were dealing with. With a sudden burst of courage, Jake pushed the door open a crack, his heart hammering even harder. "Hey!" The words exploded from his lips, raw and powerful. The laughter stopped instantly. Jake's heart pounded, a mix of fear and adrenaline coursing through him. The intruders turned, wide-eyed, surprised by the sudden confrontation. One of them, a scruffy-looking man with a bandana, squinted at him, then broke into a mock smile. "What's this?" he taunted, his voice dripping with arrogance. Jake stood his ground, gripping the hoe like it was a sword. "You don't belong here." For a moment, the air cracked with tension, both sides measuring each other up. The laughter that once filled the barn had turned into something deeper, something dark. The other man kicked at the hay, irritation flashing across his face. "What are you going to do, kid?" But Jake wasn't afraid. Anger surged through him, filling him with a strength he didn't know he had. The first intruder advanced, stepping toward him, miscalculating their own advantage. Before Jake could fully process the moment, his feet moved instinctively. He swung the hoe, narrowly missing as the man sprang back, surprise flashing in his eyes. The second man shouted, now backing away. "Only trouble here is you being in my barn." Jake felt the strength in his voice, an unyielding spirit emerging from deep within. Just then the sound of gravel crunching underfoot echoed outside. Jake's heart leaped. It was his dad. Tom Johnson, a man built tall and strong, stepped into view, flashlight in hand. His broad shoulders and determined stride instantly instilled a sense of confidence in Jake. Tom's voice rumbled, laced with authority. The intruders froze, evaluating their scant options. Panic flickered in their eyes. Nothing, we were just leaving," the bandana-wearing man stammered, but they both knew it was too late for easy escapes. Jake shouted, revealing the sense of brotherhood that had enveloped him. Tom moved closer, the barn light illuminating the men's faces. The men exchanged nervous glances. The bravado that had once empowered them now faded away. They were outnumbered, cornered like wild animals. Each glance between them now boiled with anxiety. All right. One of them blurted, hands raised defensively, desperately aiming for a way out. "Just leave. And don't ever come back," Jake shouted, his hoarse voice shaky yet unwavering. As Jake stood beside his father, a fierce bond strengthened with every moment. Tom had always taught him that strength doesn't come from size or weapons. It comes from heart and willpower. The intruders turned to flee, darting out of the barn and into the open fields. They bolted, their laughter now full of fear echoing into the night as they receded into the distance, leaving behind a mess of scattered tools and a hushed silence in the barn. Tom turned to Jake, eyes filled with pride. "You did well, son." Jake felt a rush of warmth spread through him. "But what if they come back? We'll stand together just like we did tonight." "We protect what's ours," Tom replied, his voice steady, grounding amidst the chaos. The weight of their confrontation settled in, leaving a hollow feeling in Jake's stomach. He sat on a hay bale, the adrenaline beginning to fade away. He whispered, unsure whether the tension had truly passed. Tom followed his son's gaze, scanning the dark landscape that had felt so familiar yet oddly menacing only moments before. "We'll be okay, but we need to be ready always," he said, nodding seriously. As the moon hung high above them, casting a silvery glow over the farm, Jake realized something profound. He wasn't just defending property. He was standing guard over generations of hard work, sweat-soaked dreams, and the very soil upon which they stood. In the days that followed, the encounter lingered in the back of Jake's mind, brewing a deep sense of responsibility. He began working alongside his father, not just in the fields, but also reinforcing the barn, closing up any weak spots, ensuring nothing could go unchecked again. People in town began hearing the rumors. The Johnsons had fought off intruders, and the story morphed into something larger than life, stirring courage and solidarity among the community. Townsfolk approached with offers of help, neighbors offering to install better locks and even talk about setting up a neighborhood watch. The warmth of camaraderie filled the air. As families gathered at the Johnsons' porch for dinner, laughter mingled with stern tales of vigilance. The atmosphere lit up with hope and purpose as they shared stories of resilience. One summer evening, while the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with fiery reds and golden yellows, Jake found himself sitting on the porch steps. The smell of barbecued ribs wafted through the air, mingling with the sounds of children playing nearby. As Tom joined him, he couldn't help but share his thoughts. He paused, gathering his emotions. Tom leaned back, studying the sunset. "Home is where we find strength, son." Jake felt a swell of understanding. His earlier fears transformed into a sense of pride. They were part of something bigger than themselves, a community bound by shared experience and an unwavering commitment to protect one another. As summer turned to fall, the Johnsons worked tirelessly, harvesting crops as the colors of autumn splashed vibrantly across the hills. The barn echoed with laughter and chatter, and ambience rejuvenated. They had founded a sense of safety, a fortress not just of wood and hay, but of spirit and unity. Yet, like any good story, challenges will reappear. Late one evening, after a long day in the fields, Jake's phone buzzed ominously. A message from a neighbor flickered across the screen. "Saw the same two guys loitering near your farm." His pulse quickened. Fear slithered through him like a shadow. He rushed to find his dad, adrenaline fueling his resolve. "Dad," Tom's expression hardened, determination flaring within him. "Let's not panic, we'll act strategically. Gather your courage." With renewed purpose, Jake rallied the neighborhood. They set up patrols, strategic watches, and shared information. They transformed fear into preparation, armoring themselves with confidence in numbers. And then, one night, the inevitable happened. During his watch shift, Jake spotted figures lurking near the barn. The same dark silhouettes from before, confidence replaced by a new desperation. Heart hammering, he alerted Tom, and together they gathered the others. Under the cover of darkness, they proposed a plan and ambush, but this time they were ready. Traps were set and watchpoints established throughout the night. As the intruders made their move, creeping cautiously towards the supplies, the sound of rustling in the bushes filled the air. Lights flashed on, illuminating the startled faces of the invaders, confusion mixing with terror. Jake shouted again, but now it held the weight of their shared resolve. The panicked men turned to flee, caught in their own trap, only to be met with the gathering storm of neighbors rallying behind the Johnsons. They had become a united wall of protection. Within moments, the intruders were apprehended, their sense of security stripped away, vulnerability replacing their earlier bravado. As they faced the gathered community, something shifted in the atmosphere. Fear literally turned to confidence. Jake stood proud, watching as his father spoke to the gathered crowd. "This is our home, our community. We won't stand idly by while others try to take it from us." And just like that, the cycle rewrote itself. From fear to safety, chaos to unity. The specter of intruders faded into distant memory as the bond among the townsfolk solidified beneath the weight of shared responsibility. As Jake grew older, each harvest marked a chapter of their family's legacy, enriching not only the land but the very fabric of their community. They built a future anchored in remembrance of their collective battle. Years turned into decades, and while the faces may have changed, the spirit endured. Children grew, laughter echoed through fields, and lessons calmed the echoes of anxiety. Jake Johnson became a man of the land as his father had been, each day cultivating not just crops but friendships forged in fire. Looking across the fields, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jake couldn't help but reflect. He stood proud on the same porch where he'd faced down shadows, now casting light on those he loved. The farm would forever be their sanctuary, a testament to resilience, love, and an unwavering spirit that no intruder could ever conquer. Together, they had not just defended it, they had intricately woven their lives into its very essence, leaving behind a legacy rooted in strength. The moon hung high, casting a silver glow over the Johnson farm, its fields rolling gently like waves under a dark, captivating sky. It was a quiet evening, a typical night in this sleepy rural town, until it wasn't. Around 10 o'clock, the serenity shattered with a sharp sound, echoing through the stillness like a thunderclap. A distant crash rattled the peace, sending tremors of alarm racing through the heart of Jake Johnson. Jake sprang from his bed, confusion morphing into instinct. Sleep abandoned him, that gut feeling kicking in something was wrong. He pulled on his clothes as quickly as his shaking hands would allow, every second feeling like an eternity. He remembered stories of farmhouses left vulnerable, homes that intruders perceived as easy targets. The response came swiftly: stay put. With his heart pounding like a drum, Jake crept cautiously toward the window. The moonlight spilled into his room like a flood, illuminating familiar sights: the worn-out baseball glove, the photographs of summers spent laughing with family. But that night, everything felt different. That night, the unknown lurked outside. He dashed down the creaky stairwell, glancing out the window as he reached the kitchen. His gut twisted. Barn doors stood ajar, and shadowy figures flitted inside, their movements frantic and hurried. He squinted, straining to hear the muffled sounds of their hurried conversations, laughter intermingling with the rustling of hay. It sent a chill down his spine. Jake's thoughts raced. Who were they? What did they want? The farm had always been a sanctuary, a place woven with the history of his family, rich with the memories of hard work and love. But now, to these intruders, it looked just like an easy mark. Adrenaline flooded through his veins as he gathered his courage. He slipped outside, the cool breeze slapping against his face, refocusing his mind. Each step felt deliberate, purposeful. He needed to stop them, to protect what was rightfully his. Just then, he caught sight of an old pitchfork resting against the barn wall. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. He gripped it tightly, heart racing as he edged closer to the open barn doors. Inside, the figures darted between piles of hay and scattered tools, filling bags with whatever valuables they could find. They didn't seem to realize the weight of their actions. They didn't know the turmoil they were stirring inside Jake. He was trembling. Was it fear or just the cold night air? Maybe it was both. Hey! The words burst from him, raw and instinctive. The intruders froze. For a heartbeat, time stretched like an elastic band. The air thickened with tension. The men slowly turned around, surprise flashing in their eyes. One sneered, clearly unafraid. Jake squared his shoulders, planting his feet firmly on the ground. He was done backing down. This is my home. The laughter from earlier evaporated, leaving a tainted silence. The other man, broader and tougher looking, stepped forward. You're all alone out here, kid. What are you going to do? Jake's grip tightened on the pitchfork. He could feel every beat of his heart pounding in rhythm with his resolve. Behind him, the wind rustled through the corn stalks, echoing his determination. That was enough to send a stirring pride through his veins. He wasn't just protecting soil, he was safeguarding a legacy. The leading intruder smirked, advancing slowly. Just as he reached for Jake, the barn door creaked startlingly behind him, catching the intruders off guard. Tom Johnson, with a commanding presence born from years of hard work, stepped into the light. His voice broke through the haze of fear that surrounded Jake. The intruders exchanged panicked glances, their confidence cracking. We were just looking for some stuff," the first man stammered, as if making a feeble excuse could make their invasion disappear. Jake shouted, standing firm beside his father. Now caught between a rock and a hard place, the two men began to reconsider their escape route. Tom took a step closer, eyes narrowing. "You need to leave." The intruders remained frozen for just a moment longer, weighing their dwindling options. He turned to run, but Jake lunged forward. With a desperate swing, he raised the pitchfork, but he wasn't aiming to hurt, just to scare them off. This was about protecting his family, not physical confrontation. The taller of the two stumbled backward, tripping over a rusted old bucket, the sounds of his panic echoing through the barn. In the chaos, Jake could see their arrogance melting into fear, and it fueled his resolve. He yelled again. Tom stepped forward, his presence a protective force. "You shouldn't have come here." The men hesitated. Maybe they had underestimated the Johnsons. They hadn't counted on a kid standing strong beside his father in defense of their home. As if on cue, the bark of Buster, the family dog, pierced the night air, echoing from the farmhouse. The sound carried with it a fierce loyalty, a warning. The two men exchanged frantic looks, each weighing whether they could fight or flee. Realization dawned their bravado had led them into a trap they could not escape. One of the intruders shouted, and that desperate cry filled the night as they bolted toward the door. They dashed past a stack of hay, scrambling as they went, disappearing into the dark like shadows fleeing from the dawn. Tom watched them go, heart racing, breathing heavily with relief. Jake's grip slowly relaxed on the pitchfork, adrenaline fading away. "Yeah, I think so," he mumbled, shaken but proud. "You did good." The way his father spoke filled Jake with an unfamiliar warmth validation. Jake asked, a lingering worry creeping in. "I wouldn't take any chances," Tom replied, glancing around the barn. That night, the excitement faded into uneasy stillness, but the experience had instilled something new in Jake, a sense of determination, an understanding of the depths of loyalty that ran through his family like roots in fertile soil. The next morning brought the warmth of the sun alongside whispers of the night's events, spreading rapidly through the small town. Jake quickly discovered that news traveled fast in their close-knit community. Neighbors began dropping by, stopping at the farmhouse, expressing concern and offering help. "Your farm is too precious to let it slip away from you," one neighbor said, bringing fresh coffee, the aroma folding into the air like a comforting blanket. Jake's heart swelled with appreciation. These were the people who made up their world, hardworking folk who understood the value of community, who would come together in times of need. Weeks passed. The memory of the intruders faded like a distant storm cloud. Life on the farm drifted back to its normal rhythm. Days turned into evenings filled with laughter as Jake and his family harvested crops, watched sunsets spill colors across the sky, and recounted old family stories woven with love. But the experience remained in the fabric of their lives. A lesson learned: vigilance was not just for the night, it was a way of life. Then one evening, as they sat on the porch sipping lemonade, Buster growled low and deep, ears perked up in alarm. Jake's heart sank. He followed the dog's gaze toward the field. Figures were approaching, trudging slowly through the tall grass, draped in shadows. His father stood up, instincts flaring back to life. "Stay here, Jake." Jake watched as Tom stepped off the porch, heart racing. He stood taller than anyone in town, imposing and strong. But in that moment, he realized he couldn't just sit and wait. He grabbed the pitchfork again and moved to his father's side, unity pulsing between them like electricity. As the figures came closer, they revealed themselves, and the distinctive faces of the previous intruders materialized from the darkness. Just as fear began to creep in, it was quickly replaced by rage. They yelled, recognizing the Johnsons. Each intruder wore a look of unadulterated panic. Tom bellowed, a firm command that echoed through the fields. The men fumbled for words, their confidence shattered. "We didn't mean to," one started, but Tom cut him off. "No more chances." Jake felt power in those words, a seething assurance coursing through him. Together, they were a formidable wall of defiance. He said, anger boiling behind his calm facade. "This is our home." The intruders glanced back at the thick underbrush, weighing their escape, clearly caught in their miscalculation. Their faces paled as realization sunk in. There would be no easy out this time. They had misjudged the Johnsons, thinking they were weak, but they were wrong. Spinning on their heels, they turned to run again, hastily retreating into the heavy darkness from which they had come. The moon glinted ominously on their retreating figures, and Jake felt an unexpected surge of triumph wash over him. "Good job, son," Tom said, pride radiating from him. That night, as the stars twinkled overhead, Jake turned to his dad. Tom took a moment to reflect. "Life has its battles, Jake, but we face them as a family." The fear had faded, replaced by a determination woven through their shared experiences. They were protectors of their home, guardians of a legacy that ran deep through the fertile soil. And as time marched on, Jake knew they would continue to stand united together, fiercely guarding what was theirs. Years later, standing on the porch where he once faced down those intruders as a brave kid, Jake gazed at the sprawling fields, thoughts filling with gratitude. This wasn't just land, it was home. It was their story, their identity crafted through sweat, determination, and bonds of loyalty that would never falter. He looked over to his father, still strong and steadfast. They had thrived, watching generations grow and laugh amidst the crops. They had become not just survivors, but champions of their community, examples of what it means to protect those you love. As the sun dipped below the horizon, wrapping the farm in golden light, Jake felt invincible. Because this wasn't just a farm, it was a testament to resilience, an enduring legacy, a reminder that together they could face whatever challenges came their way. The strength of family, woven into every inch of their land, would always rise against the darkness, and they would remain unbroken. The moon hung high, casting a silver light over the dense cornfields of the Johnson farm, the air thick with the scent of earth and night blooms. It was one of those still evenings where every rustle seemed amplified, accentuating the tranquility that smothered the town. But tranquility is often a thin veil, easily ripped apart with even the smallest disturbance. That night, a sudden crash shattered the quiet, echoing through the stillness like a gunshot. Jake Johnson, only 16, jolted awake in his room, heart racing. He had thought he heard something, perhaps a stray animal knocking over a bucket, but deep down, he knew that sound had been different. It was too loud, too deliberate. He scrambled out of bed, adrenaline flooding his system, and hurried down the narrow hallway, past family photos that told stories of harvest seasons long gone. The silence weighed heavy around him. As he crept to the back door, he bit his lip, holding his breath, trying to gather his courage. Peering through the window, his eyes widened. There in the dark, shadows moved furtively by the Barntu figures, lit like ghosts by the moonlight. They were creeping around, digging through the supplies as though it were a treasure trove. His heart thundered in his chest. This wasn't a mere curiosity, it was an invasion. Jake's thoughts raced. Who were they? What did they want? Memories flooded his mind, those tales shared around the dinner table about the dangers that lurked beyond the borders of home, stories of intruders who saw farms as easy targets. Fear gripped him, but it quickly transformed into slow-burning rage. This was his home. He wouldn't let anyone take what belonged to his family. A light buzz pulsed back instantly, "Stay in your room." But Jacob couldn't wait. Mustering all that he had, he slipped on boots and ran out of the house, the cool night air hitting his skin like a splash of cold water. Each step felt heavy, but he knew he had to reach them before they stole anything. As he approached the barn, he spotted an old shovel leaning against the wall. It might not be much, but it was better than nothing. With a deep breath to steady himself, he picked it up and crept closer. The intruders hadn't noticed him yet, their back turned, engrossed in their thievery. One of them suddenly shouted, startling Jake. The bald man turned and waved a crowbar threateningly, a frenzied light dancing in his eyes. The other, slightly taller with scruffy hair, laughed nervously, tossing tools around like they were playthings. Jake's voice cut through the air, surprisingly solid despite the chaos swirling within him. The intruders turned, surprise morphing into disdain. The taller one sneered, mock amusement in his voice. "Get out," Jake said firmly, gripping the shovel tighter. "This is my family's farm." A tension-filled silence enveloped them, each side gauging the other. Jake felt a surge of bravery rushing through him. He wasn't just some kid anymore, he was fighting for what mattered. The bald man stepped forward, waving the crowbar. "You really think you can stop us, kid?" Jake shouted back, trying to summon every ounce of defiance within him. His heart raced, the fear trying to claw its way back, but he pushed it down. Just then, a noise erupted from the farmhouse, a heavy thud. What felt like an eternity of tension snapped as Jake's father stormed into the barn, a commanding presence that filled the room. He stood tall, his shadow casting an imposing figure against the barn walls. "Tom Johnson," demanded, his voice ringing with authority. The intruders faltered, their confidence crumbling. We were just looking for something," the bald man stuttered, clearly realizing they were caught. "Looking for something?" Tom's voice roared, pushing the two men back a step. Jake's heart steadied as he stood beside his father, the presence of his old man adding a layer of strength to his own resolve. Jake yelled, pointing the shovel like a knight wielding a sword. The men exchanged frantic glances, calculations racing through their minds. The situation was shifting and they knew it. Slowly they began to back away, confusion etched across their faces. "We didn't mean any trouble, man," the taller one mumbled, desperation creeping in. "Trouble is exactly what you've done," Tom replied. Just then, the looming threat of their authority flickered in the men's eyes, and they wasted no more time. They turned and bolted for the door, the panic sending them scrambling over tools and hay, desperately escaping what they had awakened. As they fled into the night, Jake felt triumphant, standing strong alongside his father. "Did you see that?" Tom turned to Jake, pride filling his voice. "You were courageous, son." But as the adrenaline faded, a wave of anxiety rolled in. "Are they really gone?" "I don't know, but we can't live in fear," Tom replied, placing a reassuring hand on Jake's shoulder. "We have to secure this place." That night they locked every door and window, ensuring that nothing was left vulnerable. Jake stayed awake, tossing and turning as he replayed the encounter over and over. It felt unreal, terrifying, something that shouldn't have happened to them. But morning light chased away the shadows, bathing the farm in warmth. Everything felt normal again. The cows mooed as the sun rose, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. And yet the memory of the intruders lingered in Jake's mind like a bad dream, a haunt that wouldn't easily fade. As the weeks rolled on, whispers about what had transpired began to circulate through the town. The tale morphed, inflated with bits of excitement and caution. Neighbors started dropping by, gathering around the dinner table to share coffee and their own stories of near threats. The community rallied, offering support and a renewed sense of solidarity. One evening, as they sat on the porch sipping sweet tea, a neighbor, Mrs. McCarthy, shared her experience. "I had a similar situation last summer." Her words resonated, strengthening Jake's belief that they were not alone. Days turned to weeks, and the Johnsons honed their vigilance. They reinforced locks, installed bright outdoor lights, and built a strong community watch. Each evening, Jake joined his father on the porch, eyes scanning the horizon, turning what began as a fearful threat into a united stand against uncertainty. But as with all stories, tension loomed on the horizon. One evening in mid-August, as the sun dipped below the fields, Jake noticed something unsettling in the distance, figures moving along the tree line. He rubbed his eyes, trying to dispel the growing dread. He pointed, heart racing again. Tom turned, frowning. They watched as the figures stepped from the shadows. The familiar sight of the two men re-emerged, moving like phantoms across the twilight. This time, there was no bravado in their step. Desperation clung to them like an old coat, and fear arched their brows. "Jake, go inside and lock the door," Tom commanded, his voice booming with authority. Swallowing his protests, Jake dashed inside, fingers fumbling for the lock. He peered through the window, watching as the scene unfolded. His father stood firm at the edge of the porch, unwavering in the face of fear. The intruders edged closer, hesitant and desperate. "Don't you get it?" Tom shouted, his tone resolute. With a sudden burst of courage, the bald man lunged forward, trying to make a break for it, but Tom was quicker, grabbing a nearby gardening tool and holding it aloft as a barrier. The taller man hesitated, fear flashing across his features. "Come on, man, we just need some cash." At that moment, Jake felt a swell of frustration. These men thought they could come back and manipulate fear to their advantage. Adrenaline ignited his determination as he made his way to the door. Tom glanced back, uncertainty wavering in his expression. "Stay inside, Jake." But Jake shoved the door open, stepping onto the porch with the fire of 100 suns. "No." The intruders faltered, eyeing this new confrontation, this fiery teenager ready to protect his family. Jake shouted, his voice ringing through the dark. Every ounce of fear evaporated from him in that moment. It was replaced by a raw feeling of power. Their faces paled, realizing they had underestimated both father and son. They turned and bolted, adrenaline propelling them away from the scene, their cries echoing in the night as they retreated into the shadows. Jake stood tall, the cool breeze flowing around him, exhilaration rushing through him. Tom turned to his son, pride swelling in his chest. "I did?" Jake asked, genuine concern creeping back into his voice. Tom clapped a hand on Jake's shoulder, their bond strengthened, sealed under the shadow of the night's confrontation. That night they didn't sleep. Instead, they sat together on the porch, discussing how to reinforce their defenses. They planned strategically, recognizing that the aftermath of fear was something they had to navigate together. The next day, the reality of their situation settled heavily. They reached out to the local sheriff, reporting the incidents, ensuring the community was aware. They fostered relationships, sharing their experiences with neighbors, supporting one another, knowing that strength lay in unity. As the weeks faded into months, Jake grew more adept at navigating the balance between caution and normalcy. Community events flourished in the glow of resilience. Pumpkin festivals and summer barbecues became symbols of strength and togetherness. The Johnsons weren't just farmers, they had become cornerstones of their community. As autumn painted the fields in hues of orange and gold, fall harvest festivals bloomed with laughter and the sweet scent of baked pies. The earlier scares became stories of courage shared around bonfires, reminding everyone of the strength found in unity. Years later, dressed in the worn boots of a true farmer, Jake stood on the same porch where fear once tumbled violently through their lives. He looked out over the fields, the crops vibrant, the community strong. Through storms and strife, they had become resilient, shaping their narrative into one of perseverance, friendship, and family. They had faced the shadows together, ultimately forging an unbreakable bond. This was more than just a farm. It was a legacy rooted in challenges, fortified by love and cradled in faith. And as Jake stood with his father watching the sunset, a sense of peace enveloped him. They had faced their trials and emerged stronger, ready to protect what was truly theirs, whatever the future would bring. The moon hung low over the Johnson farm, casting an eerie glow over the fields of waving corn. The night was still, broken only by the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant croak of frogs. It was serene, almost too peaceful, but beneath this calm facade lurked darkness. As the clock struck midnight, a sudden crash echoed through the air, slicing through the stillness like a blade. It was followed by the unmistakable sound of laughter, taunting and raucous. In that moment, Jake Johnson, a 16-year-old with more heart than experience, bolted upright in bed, confusion giving way to adrenaline. The invaders were here. He waited for a moment, straining to hear more. His heart hammered in his chest. Was it the wind, or were real intruders inside his family's barn? Memories of stories he'd heard swirled in his mind. There had been whispers in town about farms being robbed, but he had never thought it would happen to them. Breathless moments passed. A text came back, "Stay put." But Jake couldn't just sit there. He threw on a pair of jeans and a worn sweatshirt, his heart racing as he tiptoed down the dark hallway. He peeked through the window. The barn doors stood ajar, silhouetted figures moving rhythmically inside, their shadows darting like frantic rabbits. As he squinted, he could see one of them holding something metal, a crowbar, glinting ominously in the moonlight. Instinct surged through him, a primal urge to defend his home kicking in as his hands clenched into fists. This farm, which held all their memories-long summers, the scent of fresh hay, the laughter of family, was under threat. Someone was trying to take it from him. He rushed to the back door, the cool night air hitting him like a wave. Taking a deep breath, he grabbed an old garden hoe leaning against the wall. It wasn't much, but it was a weapon, and it was better than nothing. He had to confront them. That sense of duty ignited a fire inside him. Jake crept toward the barn, each step burning with determination. As he approached the barn doors, he could hear the men laughing, their voices rising like a dark chant of recklessness. In that moment, he felt his stomach tighten with both fear and fury. "Hey!" He shouted, the words echoing with surprising strength. The laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by a heavy silence. The figures turned to face him, their expressions a mix of shock and disbelief. One of them, a tall man with a scruffy beard, narrowed his eyes. He chuckled, a laugh devoid of any real humor. Leave. Jake's voice held firm, although inside he felt a quiver. The other intruder, a stockier man with a bandana over his head, snickered, stepping forward. He pointed at the hoe, sneering. Jake's determination hardened. Every ounce of fear evaporated, replaced by the fierce instinct to defend what was his. Suddenly, the taller man lunged forward, brandishing the crowbar, their earlier bravado dialed back to desperation. In that split second, the barn door creaked behind them, surprising both men. Tom Johnson, Jake's father, stood framed in the doorway, his silhouette casting a powerful shadow. With a firm expression, he took in the scene. A nothing man. The stocky one stammered, but their bravado had faded. Tom moved forward, his voice steady as granite. You're not going anywhere. Jake felt a rush of pride seeing his father standing tall, ready to defend what mattered. The intruders exchanged frantic glances, weighing their options. The threat of looming authority hovered in the air, and with one last look at the supplies they had been about to steal, they turned to run, panic driving them. Tom yelled as they bolted into the night. Relief washed over Jake like a tidal wave, adrenaline pulsing through him, but as the last echoes of their footsteps faded, uncertainty began to creep in again. Tom placed a reassuring hand on Jake's shoulder. For now, yes. The two men fled, but the feeling of vulnerability clung to Jake like a heavy coat. What if they came back? That evening, they locked every window and door, reinforcing their defenses. Jake lay awake, heart racing, replaying the encounter over and over in his mind. He thought of how close they had come to losing everything, a lifetime of memories woven into the very fabric of their land. The next morning dawned bright and clear, yet the unease lingered in the air like the storm clouds threatening to roll in. Now whispers of the night's events echoed through the small community. Jake soon found that news traveled fast in this town. At school, people approached him with curiosity, some with fear. Friends asked as they huddled around him during lunch. Yeah, Jake replied, trying to sound braver than he felt. In the days that followed, community members gathered at the Johnson farm, offering a helping hand and a listening ear. As summer transitioned into fall, they strengthened their defenses and began forming a community watch. During the evenings, neighbors took turns patrolling the grounds, each standing guard over the other's homes. Life became a blend of busy days working the fields and vigilant nights. Slowly, Jake began to find comfort in the rhythm of life on the farm. Still, the shadows of that night haunted him. The image of the intruders lingered in the back of his mind, a bitter reminder of vulnerability. Then one bright autumn evening, while the sun dipped low behind the fields, he noticed movement in the distant shadowy figures lurking around the edges of the tree line. His heart raced. Were they back? He shouted, pointing toward the disturbance. Panic flooded his veins, his earlier courage wavering. Tom stepped outside, squinting into the fading light. Stay here. No, Jake insisted, fighting to keep his voice steady. Stay put, son. But adrenaline surged through Jake as he followed his father outside. They walked toward the shadows, the night air thickening with tension. As they drew closer, Jake could see their faces. It was them. The same intruders from before, back again with desperation etched into their expressions. Fear and anger collided within him. They thought they could return, but they were mistaken. Jake felt embers of courage flicker inside him once more. Jake shouted, forcing the words out with a strength he didn't know he possessed. The taller intruder froze, noticeably shaken. We didn't mean to. Tom stepped forward, unwavering. You're trespassing. I don't want to see you around here again. With that, they turned, bolting from the scene once more, looking over their shoulders as they dashed into the dark. Jake stood tall, feeling victorious, a warrior defending his home. He exclaimed, breathless with adrenaline. Tom nodded, a proud smile spreading across his face. But the victory felt hollow as Jake noticed the lingering threat in the air. Their home should be a place of warmth and safety, not one constantly under siege. Jake asked, the question heavy with concern. I don't know, Tom replied, looking toward the horizon, determination etched in his features. But if they do, we're ready. The weeks that followed were a delicate balancing act between vigilance and normality. The community had pulled together, reinforcing their network of strength. Nights were filled with laughter, shared stories around bonfires, and neighbors watching one another's backs. In the cozy glow of the bonfire, they transformed terror into unity, forging relationships that went deeper than fear. Every scare became an opportunity to strengthen their resolve and defend their legacy. They held community meetings, where people shared their own experiences, formulating strategies for the future, ensuring no one would mess with their homes without consequence. As they fortified their defenses, Jake began to thrive. School was a whirlwind of activity, sports, dances, and friendships blossomed, but the shadows of that night still lingered, whispering reminders of the dangers that could approach at any moment. One chilly evening, while everyone was busy preparing for the harvest festival, Jake spotted movement near the silos. Shadows merged and shifted as dusk settled in. His heart dropped. He shouted, rushing toward the motion. Jake met his father at the edge of the field, fiery determination burning in his chest. The same two men crept closer, moving tentatively, their bravado now stripped away. "Stay behind me," Tom commanded, stepping forward to confront them. "This is your last warning." The taller man hesitated but then reached into his jacket, producing something glittering, a knife. They were cornered, desperation gripping them. For a moment, Jake held his breath, fear flooding in like a rush of cold water. "Just give us some cash, okay?" The stocky one pleaded, his voice shaky with urgency. Tom shouted, confidence permeating the air. "You've had your chances, you're trespassing, and I won't let this go any further." The intruders, realizing their gamble had failed, pivoted and fled, the sound of their footsteps echoing as they disappeared into the trees once more. Jake felt a rush of exhilaration, the adrenaline surging through him. They'd done it again. They'd stood firm and pushed back against the shadows that threatened to invade their lives. Through it all, he understood the importance of standing together, of defending their legacy, their home. In the week that followed, the community held a gathering, not to recant tales of fear, but to celebrate resilience. Stories transformed into legends, tales crafted over bonfires during the crisp autumn nights. They became a rallying cry, stories intertwined, creating a tapestry of courage among neighbors who were committed to one another. Years rolled ahead, and Jake matured into a strong young man, every challenge faced sharpening his resolve. The early threat of intruders faded into whispers of the past, eclipsed by the strength of community. As he stood one autumn morning, surveying the vast fields ready for harvest, he marveled at how they had all come together to fortify their sanctuary. It wasn't just about protecting land. It was about nurturing a legacy built on trust and love, a heartwarming foundation that fueled their ambition. Jake learned that sometimes fear could be a catalyst for change. They had turned vulnerability into strength, crafting bonds that would endure through life's storms. In the twilight glow of another harvest season, he again stood with his father on the porch, their home bustling with life. He felt a swell of pride, a sense of belonging. They had conquered challenges together, emerged stronger and more united than ever. And as the stars began to twinkle overhead, he could see plainly that no one could take their farm away again. Not now, not ever. The Johnson farm would continue to thrive, nurtured by the love that cultivated every inch of it. Their story became a testament to resilience, a legacy that would echo for generations to come. A sudden crash shattered the stillness of the Johnson farm one fateful night, echoing like an alarm bell through the quiet fields. Jake Johnson, a lean 16-year-old with tousled hair and a heart full of dreams, jolted awake, eyes wide and breathless. He lay there for a moment, frozen, straining to catch any hint of movement beyond the walls. Slowly he sat up, listening intently. The silence was heavy, but it was broken again, this time by the sharp sound of laughter drifting from the barn. It wasn't the joyful laughter of his family or friends. It was mocking, taunting. Something sinister lurked in the shadows, and deep down, Jake knew this night was far from ordinary. He swung his legs over the side of his bed, heart racing. Memories flashed in his mind, stories circulating around town about farmhouses being targeted, neighbors sharing anxious glances over coffee. For a brief moment, uncertainty gripped him. Should he call his dad? Should he wait? But the truth was undeniable. There were intruders on his family's land, and fear morphed into resolve. He shuffled into action, throwing on jeans and a worn-out hoodie. The soft padding of his bare feet echoed on the wooden floor as he crept to the window, peering out into the moonlit night. Jake's heart sank as he spotted two shadowy figures moving around the barn, silhouetted against the dim glow of the moon. They were rifling through tools and supplies like children picking through candy, totally oblivious to the chaos they were bringing. The familiar sense of hay and earth now felt heavy with dread. He fought against the urge to flee, gripping the windowsill tightly. Every fiber of his being screamed to protect what was his. This wasn't just a farm. It was generations of hard work, laughter, and love woven into the very fabric of the land. With newfound courage, he grabbed his phone and texted his dad. Seconds felt like hours as he waited for a response, listening intently for the sound of footsteps approaching. A reply suddenly buzzed back, "Stay put." But seconds later, Jake's feet were pounding against the floor, adrenaline propelling him out the door. He crept toward the barn, the night air chilling his skin. He knew he had to confront them now before it was too late. As he neared the barn, he spotted an old pitchfork wedged into the ground, and without hesitation, he yanked it free. It wasn't much, but in his hands it felt like a shield. Just feet away from the barn door now, he took a deep breath, steeling himself. "Hey!" His voice rang out, trembling yet defiant. The laughter abruptly stopped, and silence enveloped the night like a thick fog. Both intruders turned, surprise etched on their faces. One of them, a burly man with a scruffy beard, laughed nervously. "What's this? A kid with a pitchfork?" Jake held his ground, the pitchfork gripped tightly in front of him. "You don't belong here." In that moment, courage surged within him, fueled by all he had seen and heard in his short life. The other intruder, a stocky man wearing a bandana, stepped closer, his stance threatening. Then came the unmistakable sound of hurried footsteps, the way they quickly turned from amusement to confusion. Jake whirled around to see his father, Tom Johnson, stepping out of the shadows, his large frame silhouetted against the light streaming from the barn. His voice commanded authority, breaking through their bravado. The intruders, now realizing they were outmatched, exchanged panic-stricken glances. "Oh, we were just looking for some tools," the burly man said, his voice laced with nervousness. "Tools?" Tom shot back, taking a step forward. The tension in the air thickened, wrapping around them like a storm cloud. "You don't want any trouble, man. We're just here for some quick cash," the stocky man said, a hint of desperation creeping into his voice. "I'm not playing games with you. You're trespassing on my property." Tom's voice echoed through the barn, firm and unyielding. The intruders exchanged glances that conveyed a myriad of emotions: fear, anger, and confusion. They had thought this farm would be an easy mark, but before them stood a father and son united against the threat. With a sudden burst of impulse, the stocky intruder lunged forward, raising the crowbar high. But Jake reacted instinctively. He thrust the pitchfork forward, aiming to protect his father and ward off the intruder. Sudden movement startled the man, sending him stumbling back. He yelled, panic flooding his voice. Tom shouted, standing tall with Jake at his side, a fortified wall of determination. The intruders hesitated, weighing their options before finally deciding to bolt for the door, racing into the night. The burly man called back, their threats dissolving into the darkness as they disappeared. Jake felt a rush of exhilaration wash over him, heart racing again in triumph. They had stood their ground together. "Did you see that?" Tom put a heavy hand on Jake's shoulder, pride shimmering in his gaze. "You did good, son." But as a weight of relief settled in, a remnant of fear still lingered. Jake asked quietly, the adrenaline slowly dissipating. Tom surveyed the night, firm resolve flashing in his eyes. "We'll be ready." That night, they locked every door, every window, every possible entry point. The familiar sense of comfort that had once embraced the farm now felt strained, like a tightrope ready to snap. Days transformed into weeks, and the incident lingered in everyone's minds. Neighbors shared their experiences, and community meetings sprung up, discussing how to bolster security and keep everyone safe. They would no longer be victims. They were a united front against the threat of those who saw their vulnerability as an opportunity. But fear, like a shadow, hovered just out of sight. Jake's hands trembled whenever he heard a sudden noise, and he found himself glancing over his shoulder far too often. He had learned that night that danger could arrive without warning, and the farm that had felt so secure was now a battleground for his peace of mind. Then, one early evening as they prepared for the upcoming harvest festival, Jake noticed movement by the tree line, again shadows slinking near the edges of their property. His heartbeat quickened. Fear washed over him as memories raced back, a chilling reminder of that night. He shouted, racing toward the figure, but Tom was faster, his instincts kicking in as he grabbed Jake's arm gently but firmly. "Stay back," Tom commanded, scanning the edge of the field. The shadows slipped closer, two silhouettes inching their way toward the barn again. Jake's throat tightened. It was them. The same two men from before, back again, but they had brought something darker, an air of desperation that twisted his gut into knots. Jake pleaded, already stepping forward despite his father's grip. "No, this is my job, Jake. Stay right here," Tom cautioned, his eyes narrowing on the approaching figures. The air thickened with tension, every moment stretching out uncomfortably. Just as the intruders broke through the trees, one of them, the tall man, reached for something behind his back, something shiny glinting in the dim light. Time seemed to slow as the realization hit Jake like a punch. He yelled, but it was too late. The man lunged forward with a gleaming knife, an act of desperation that transformed the air into an electric charge of fear. In that moment, instinct kicked in. Jake acted without thinking, grabbing the pitchfork once more. He shouted, brandishing it like a knight defending his castle. Tom shouted at the intruders to leave, voice booming with authority. "I won't ask you again." The weight of fear battled against righteous anger within him as Jake stood shoulder to shoulder with his father. But the intruders were no longer the cocky thieves they had been. They were cornered animals now, contemplating their next move. Jake could see the glint of determination in the taller man's eyes, but beside him was the stocky intruder, eyes wide with panic. They were trapped, driven by desperation to either escape or fight. In that moment, the tension bubbled over, coating the air in a tangible thickness that felt like a thick fog. The first flash of movement, a sudden lunge forward, desperation written all over the men's faces, sent Jake's heart thudding painfully in his chest. He shouted, but they were already closing the distance. One of them swung the knife, a visceral flash of reality that unleashed a primal instinct from deep within. Tom stepped forward, placing himself between Jake and the intruders, raising his own makeshift weapon. He commanded, voice steady yet fierce. In that fiery moment, Jake took a deep breath, adrenaline coursing through him. Together, they were ready to confront whatever lay ahead, fully aware that the stakes had never been higher. And as time stretched out, they all held their breath, suspended in a moment where everything hung in the balance. This was not just about the farm anymore. It was about survival, about fighting back against those who thought they could take it away. The rift between them deepened as fear morphed into chaos. Where would they land when the dust settled? What would happen when the fight erupted? A sudden scream filled the air, and Jake felt a chill descend around him. As the shadows swarmed, the barn doors swung open wide, revealing their last defense, the battleground about to ignite into a raging storm. The outcome remained uncertain, with threats echoing in the air. This was a fight for home, for family, and for the very soul of the land they cherished. Would the shadows consume them, or would they rise up and reclaim what was theirs? In that charged moment, everything hung by a thread, the darkness beckoning them to take a leap into the unknown.